Hello all, welcome to PLSQL Fundamentals Part 3. So let's start. So topics to be covered today: cursors, cursor attributes, and explicit cursor. So cursors, what are cursors? So every SQL statement executed by the Oracle server has an individual cursor associated with it. So whenever we are running any SQL statement, it works as an SQL cursor. Okay, so how many types we have? We have two types: implicit cursors and explicit cursors. For implicit cursors, whenever we are writing any select statement, suppose we are writing like select star from employee table where record 1 for row num is equals to 1. So for 1, it will work as an implicit cursor. Or we are writing any DML statements. So we have talked about DML statements like insert, update, delete. So we are inserting any record into any table. So it works as an implicit cursor. So implicit cursors, we don't have to define it. It will automatically work. For explicit cursors, we have to declare it and it should be named by the programmer. So in the coming slides, we will talk about explicit and implicit cursors in more detail. Now, to summarize, we have two types of cursors: implicit cursors and explicit cursors. Now, what is a cursor? So, cursor is a private SQL work area. So, it is an area where any SQL statement is executed. So, as we mentioned earlier, like we have two types of cursors: implicit cursors and explicit cursors. So, whenever we write an SQL statement, it works as an implicit cursors. So the implicit cursors are automatically created by Oracle whenever an SQL statement is executed, when there is no explicit cursor for the statement. So programmers cannot control the implicit cursors and the information in it. So whenever any DML statement like insert, update, and delete is issued, an implicit cursor is associated with this statement. For insert operations, the cursor holds that data that needs to be inserted. For update and delete, the cursor identifies the rows that would be affected. So as you can see an example, like select employee name, age, salary from employee where department is 10. So here it is working as an implicit cursor. Now to define explicit cursors, as mentioned, like explicit cursor are explicitly declared by the programmer. So what are they? They are for gaining more control over the context area. Here you can see in implicit cursor we have no control, but in explicit cursors we can have more control. So explicit cursor should be defined in the declaration section of the PLSQL block. It is created on a select statement which returns more than one row. So we will talk about examples in the later slides. Coming to some examples. So the following program will update the table and increase the salary of each customer by 500 and use the SQL percentage row count attribute to determine the number of rows affected. Okay, so here you can see we have declared a variable total rows, which is of number. We are updating the customers table and setting the salary plus 500. So if the salary is 10,000, so it will be updated by 500. Now you can see the cursor attributes. If SQL percentage not found, then we are writing no customers selected. So suppose there are no customers uh, in the table. Okay, no rows. So this will work if SQL percentage no count, because it will not return any value. Else if there are rows, then it will SQL percentage found. We have founded some rows to update, and then the total rows will be SQL percentage row count. So suppose there are 10 rows to up in the customer table, and we are setting their salary plus 500. So now it will work. It will update all 10. It will check if SQL percentage found is not found is found, and it will total rows will be row count will be 10. So it will have customer selected as 10. Okay, so this is the main function of the cursor attributes. Like it can used in any if else to check if there are customers, if there are any rows affected or not. Now talking about explicit cursors, we have so implicit cursors are written automatically. So if there are more than one row, then we have to write an explicit cursor basically. So you can see active set, which is of five. We have 5 rows. We have employee ID, we have the name and the position, clerk, manager, analyst. So how does it work? It will first, if we write an explicit cursor, it will first fetch the first record, then goes to a second, then third, then fourth, and then finally fifth. So it will every time it will have an active set. So explicit cursors are defined by the programmer. We will know what is the syntax in the coming slides. So as you can see the cursor, we have selected the current row. Now controlling explicit cursors. So how do we control the explicit cursors? First of all, we declare, like any anonymous block, we have to declare that explicit cursor. Create a named SQL area. We identify the active set. What are the rows, number of rows impacted? We have to open. Then fetch the load current rows into some variables. Then if test for existing rows, so if there are no rows, so it will be empty. It will try to fetch again, but if there are rows, it will go forward. If it is yes, and then release the active set. So we have to close the cursor as well. So these are the main controlling syntaxes basically for explicit cursors: declare, open, fetch, and close. So as mentioned, like open the cursor. This is the cursor. We are opening the cursor. This is the pointer. Like suppose there are 5 rows, so every time pointer will be in first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So this is the way the cursor fetches the records. Fetch a record from the cursor. This is the cursor again, second row, third row, continue until it's empty. So first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So until it's completed empty, it will try to fetch all the records. Now it will close the cursor. Okay, so this is the syntax. Cursor name is select statement. You have to write a select statement. Do not include the into clause in the cursor declaration. So in earlier slides, you must have seen that we have an into clause because there were only one row. But if there are more than one row, we have to use explicit cursors, and we don't write any into clause. If processing rows in a specific sequence is required, use the order by clause in the query. So if there is a particular order we need to write, then we can write as order by clause in the query, ascending or descending order. Now opening the cursor. So syntax is open cursor name. So we first of all we have declared a cursor. Now we are opening the cursor. So main points associated with opening the cursor is open the cursor to execute the query and identify the active set. So whatever if there are 5 lines, it will, in the cursor we have declared the cursor for all the 5 lines. Now we are opening the cursor. If the query returns no rows, no exception is raised. So this is the beauty of the cursor, that if the query returns no rows, no exception is raised. Third, use cursor attribute to test the outcome after a fetch. So use cursor attributes. We can use cursor attributes like percentage row, row count, percentage found, percentage not found, percentage SQL is open to test the outcome after a fetch. Now, once we have opened the cursor, now we have to import its data into some variable. Like suppose we were in earlier queries, we were fetching its data, and since it was one record, we are fetching into v variables. So here also we need to fetch its records into some variable. Okay, so retrieve the current row values into the output variables. So it will fetch one by one. Okay, include the same number of variables. So we have to include the same number of variables, like whatever we have selected. Suppose we have selected select employee name, employee age, and employee salary. So we have to define 3 variables: variable 1, variable 2, variable 3. So one will store variable uh, name of the employee, second will age of the employee, and third with the salary of the employee. So we have to include the same number of variables. Match each variable to correspond to the columns positionally. So we have to match the same. Suppose this with the employee name, this with the salary, and third one with the age. So we have to explicitly given test to see if the customer contain rows. And now we can use an SQL attribute which is not found or found to test that if there are any more rows or all the rows are completed. So mainly, like, there were 3, like for implicit cursors we have 4 attributes. Similar to that, we for explicit cursor also we have 4 attributes. So is open, again it evaluates to true if the cursor is open. Not found evaluates to true if the most fetch does not return a row. Found if the most recent fetch returns a row. And the row count for the total number of rows returned so far. One thing I forgot to tell you, that it returns that percentage found will work for the most recent fetch, not for complete. Like suppose there are 5 rows, so it will work for 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will not work for 5 because after that it doesn't have any rows. Okay, so it will fetch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then for 6th it will not able to fetch, and it will evaluate to false. Now cursors and records. So you can see the process the records of the active set conveniently by fetching values into a PLSQL record. So this is a great example where we have a cursor named as employee cursor is select. Now we are selecting employee number and employee name from a table employee. Now what we have defined is we have defined explicitly an employee cursor percentage row type. So you remember, like, we have row percentage row type, percentage type, PLSQL type variables. Now we can also define a cursor as a PLSQL record. So we have deployed an employee record as a cursor. Okay, so employee record will have all the values, all the variables. Suppose we have employee number, employee name, so it will have 2 records. If we add here age also, so it will have all the 3 values. Now again, we have defined the cursor. Now what the second step is to open the cursor. Now we are opening the cursor. So From here it is fetching the rows. Now we have inserted we have opened a loop and fetching the records into this particular employee records. So the main function of the employee record is that we don't have to write that variable 1, variable 2, variable 3. All the records from that employee cursor will be fetched into the employee record. And now we have to close the cursor. So there were main four parts: declare, open, fetch, and then close. Okay. Now cursors for loops. So how do we open a cursor in a for loop? So this is a syntax for record name in cursor name loop, statement 1, statement 2, and end loop. So for record name, you can give any record name in cursor name. So whatever the cursor name we have defined, so you have to write that particular cursor name. Then we are looping. So whatever we want to write, statement 1, statement 2, and so for cursor we don't have to write open, fetch, close, because this for loop will automatically implicitly open, fetch, and close. So this is the main point for cursors, for loops, that it will implicitly open, fetch, and close. The record is implicitly declared, so it is declared implicitly. So this is the main benefit for loops. So this is the okay. Now we also need to declare the cursor. So if we can write, so if the query is not that much like bigger, then what we can do is we can directly write in the this particular syntax. So for employee record in, so you can see that we have written the query here itself. So select employee name, department number from employee, and then looping. If employee record department number is 30, then write something like some logic, and then end looping. So it will close whenever we write end loop, so it will implicitly close the loop. So this is the like advantage of for loops. We can directly write if their query is small, but if the query is like too big, then we have to declare it and then use in the following for loop. Now cursors with parameters. So we can also write cursors with parameters. So we have like identified, like we can use in loops, we can loops in use cursors in for loops. Now we can write a cursor that is a parameterized cursor. So we can give parameter name and data type. Similarly, like we give for PLSQL procedures and functions. So similarly, we can write a parameter. Is select statement pass parameter values to cursors when the cursor is opened and the query is executed. Open an explicit cursor several times with different active set each time. So what we can do is, like, suppose we are passing a parameter name with 10 value. So we can write 10. Now again, we can open that cursor and write 20. We can also again, so we can use multiple times, several times for the current active set. So here is an example, like we have defined a cursor, employee cursor. We have given a parameter as v department and v job. Now what we have written for the query, select employee number and employee name from employee, where department number is v department number and v job is v job. Now we have to open the cursor and we see we have given 10 and clerk. So 10 will pass in the department number and clerk will pass in the job. So it will check, like select employee number name from employee table where department number is 10 and job is clerk. So you understand, like this is the advantage of parameterized cursor. So we can open it multiple times and use that particular, so it will be like dynamically fetching all the records. We don't have to hard code its value as 10. So if we want to give for 20, suppose, we can pass open employee cursor 20 and analyst. So now it will work for 20 department number and job as analyst. So this is the main benefit of cursors with parameters. So here is another example where we have a cursor see customers. So you can see select ID, name and address from customers where ID is pcust ID. So pcust ID is a number. So here just we have declared it the query. Now we are using a for loop. We are using rec customers in C customers. So C customer is my cursor. We are passing 100. So whenever we pass 100, so it will take ID as 100 and looping. So suppose there are two rows, it will fetch two records and will pay, give the value as rec customer dot name. So with the name of that particular customer. And again, we are also printing the address. So it will print the customer name as well as the address for all the two employees. Okay, so this is how we can use a for loop, and then we will end loop. And this is how we fetch the name from that cursor. So rec customer, so we have defined anything, you can give anything like rec. I have defined rec underscore customers and then rec customers dot name. So it will fetch the name of that employee and then address of that employee, rec customers dot address. So this is how we defined the cursors with parameters. Okay, so now we are closing the session. So we have studied about cursors, types of cursors, cursor attributes. We have also talked about like what are the different explicit cursors we can define, like parameterized cursors, and we have given some examples. So thank you all. We will have many more sessions for other work as well.